Yeah, I'm in the African American Studies department, and I teach hate crimes on campus.
She's also this incredible playwright, and one of the things that I want to happen later on is I have everybody's name. We're going to just kind of choose a number, and one person will walk away today with Tangled, which is a dramedy about gun violence in the Obama era. I was also telling them about you, Nicole, about how at some point people felt that you were being too critical of Obama. And that one of the things that you were saying is that that's the job he took, and we should be analytical and evaluate and know what works and what doesn't work. Can we just kind of start off with, what that criticism was and how you feel like it's changed as he enters this second term?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I know y'all have 100 things you could be doing this morning. What's interesting, I wrote the play Tangled in 2009. It was at the end of my graduate school process, and I had been doing some work in West Africa, and I started teaching in California. I taught in Los Angeles, and the issue of gun violence was always an issue for my students living in Los Angeles. I then moved back east to be closer to home, but took a job actually in Florida. So I was living in Jacksonville, Florida, and my students also were talking about the issue of gun violence in Jacksonville, Florida, but also in the communities that they came from. So when I moved back to the Illinois area, because the whole time I'm teaching, I'm listening, I'm getting calls from my mom from the different places where I lived, and she's talking about shootings happening in Chicago, and such happened on this street, and the gun violence was creeping ever closer to my own family life. And so I just decided, once I finished the degree, I said, I really need to write, I need to spend some time on this issue of gun violence. It's interesting, in West Africa, I was encountering child soldiers. I was working with some child soldiers in West Africa and realizing the experience of child soldiers in West Africa is so much like the experiences of African American and Latino youth in America. And so that pricked an issue for me. And so I just decided I need to really spend some time and really write about this issue of gun violence. And so I took a playwriting course and allowed the script that came out of it to be one that focused on gun violence. And the play just kind of took off from there. This is a play that was written a year after the sitting president, President Obama, took office. And so at that time, when I wrote the play and when it began to get some attention around the country, he hadn't said very much about the issue of gun violence. There was a real silence. I mean, he had wars to contend with. He had a very rancorous political climate that he was dealing with in D.C. He was becoming acclimated as a president. But what I was doing was writing about an issue that was close to home for me. And because the first family is from Chicago, there's a way in which we in Chicago felt both at the center of the conversation, but also the issue wasn't getting the kind of attention that we thought it should have. So what's interesting about the play, though, is that the play mentions the Obama presidency because it's been written during that time period. But the play really is a call to action for the rest of us. And that is where some of the criticism was that one of the characters in the play is a bit hard on the president. However, it comes out of her frustration. This is a play written about African American women who are funeral directors. These are people on the front lines of gun violence in our cities. They are mourning with those who are lost. They're mourning with our families. They're grieving our dead. They're burying our dead. But we don't think much about those individuals on the front lines and how they are both helping us grieve, but they're also fearful themselves. So, again, there was some criticism of the project because of what these frustrated, tired women have to say about gun violence. But more often than not, the conversations that were had about the play were positive. Because when you sit in a theater, this play has been staged in New York. It won a political theater award in New York. It's been, I did the play at Howard in D.C. The play has been on college campuses, universities, church groups have done it. And so what you find is that when you get into the meat of the play is about the rest of us. The play calls us to account and helps us think about what can we do? What do we need to do to stem the tide of gun violence? How can we help our president on the ground in the work we do every day?
Absolutely. I have not been able to put it down. I got everything yesterday, and last night I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning reading Tangled. And you're right. It's the conversations that go on all across America that don't seem to get the press or the attention, which is part of the frustration sometimes when people are looking at this presidency or any presidency. It has always been, what about me? And you and I talked a little bit about how we would do this conversation and what the questions were that I would ask. I mean, you weren't asking specifically for questions, but the direction. It's called Humanizing Justice. And your play humanizes the conversation about justice and whether or not it can be had. But the other thing is that we all seem to think that some things are a thing of the past. In other words, we've got a black president, for instance, so racism is gone. It's over with, right? And everybody kind of laughed. Yeah, it's gone. It's a thing of the past. We need to be treating everybody the same way and equally because there's no inequalities. And the truth is, that's not true. But the statement that we need to start treating everybody the same is a very true statement. And that is where the divergence is, I think, between people who don't see, and we're going to talk about Jordan and we're going to talk about Trayvon, don't see that as an important justice issue for young Black and Latino males. What are some of the things that you're finding out with your students about this issue of gun violence?
Well, I just want to make a connection to something that happened just this morning. Preparing for this talk, you and I have been on Facebook and on all kinds of social media, and so this morning I get a note from you saying that the building wasn't quite in the shape that you thought it was in when you got there, and that it was gonna, that there was some cleaning up that needed to happen. That's correct, Perry?
Yeah, no, that's right.
And the funny thing about that is that this is what I believe the president walked into. He walked into a situation, he walked into a presidency where there was a tremendous mess. So, and it's funny because I would joke with my mom about the fact that, I said the president is going to be cleaning up. We can call him the cleanup man because he's going to have to spend the majority of his first term cleaning up. And I think that it speaks to what the play is about. We are all, from the White House to our house where you all sit, we are all in the midst of a crisis around gun violence. And what you are calling us to do in this conversation so beautifully is to come in, take a seat, and figure out how to clean this up. So I think that I know that's not the thing you want to walk into when you got there, but this is where we are as a country. We are in the midst of a crisis. And we each have to figure out, what's my piece? What can I do to help clean this up?
Yeah, it's kind of like the origami piece that Julian has done. The complications, we're really all connected. Unfortunately, I'd like not to be connected to Ted Nugent. But, when I pull up my social media all this morning, about Ted Nugent and Sarah Palin, and it's like, I really don't want those people in my head anymore. But it's complicated. And, here you are a teacher, a professor, but you've also served as the outreach coordinator for the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. It's handgun violence that has been the biggest sticking point for me. My father was a hunter. I have friends that are hunters. But handguns are for killing people. I'm just sorry, I don't see any other reason for them. And a multi-millimeter gun, armor-piercing bullets, it's for killing people. Why can't we just get that simplicity of knowing that unless you are planning on killing somebody, you don't need a gun?
Well, again, the part of the complication of this is that this is rooted in our identity as Americans. We have so many myths around rugged individualism. And you all are in Texas, you know better than anyone. Right.
She knows us.
Passion. These people are committed to the ability to possess weapons. However, I think that we have to be willing to make the case that we are not interested in taking guns away from law-abiding individuals. We need those individuals working with us to help keep our children alive. Because too often, in the instances of violence as it affects inner cities, this is about illegal guns being used by minors far too often to kill each other and us. And I do a lot of talks. I live in Champaign, Illinois, which is 2 hours south of Chicago. And I did a talk, and one of the first conversations I had working with the Illinois Council, received some interesting mail, got some real interesting comments from local gun rights groups who decided they were going to come to my meeting, decided they were going to take over my meeting, decided they were going to come and let me know how people felt about gun violence reduction.
Did you disavow them of that real quickly?
Well, the issues that I had to raise with them, first of all, we started the meeting in prayer. Secondly, I think that they were surprised that the meeting was packed before they got there. And it was packed by many, many people of color. There were many black men present. There were many people of color present. And I think that they misunderstood who I was. I think they doubted my skills as an organizer. I think they doubted the fact that I know how to put security in place, too, to be able to protect what we were trying to do in that gathering. But there are also members of their organizations in the room who came and who realized, they said, oh, you're trying to keep all our children alive. And I think that we've got to be willing to come to we got to find common ground. There's got to be a place where we have to be willing to agree. We may disagree politically, but I want my children alive and I want your children alive because we need them all. And I think that's where the conversations have got to take place. And so being a teacher, teaching on a college campus is interesting because I teach hate crimes. And one of the things that, if I could just, I wrote a post recently about, I have a blog, and one of the things I wrote recently was about, people were had a lot of conversation about Sochi, whether or not there would be terrorism at the Olympics. And I wrote this piece just kind of thinking about, it was called Surviving Sochi, but we survived gun violence, gun terror in America. And I wrote this piece and I said, as a wife, I kiss my husband before he heads to work in the morning, hoping to see him at day's end. As a mom, I have a 2-year-old, beautiful 2-year-old. I said, as a mom, I drop my toddler at preschool praying that she'll have a great day. And yet, whether dropping her off or picking her up, I always make sure to check the pocket to make sure that I have 2 things when I pick her up: my keys and my cell phone. I make sure I have my phone in my hand just in case there might be a shooter in her school building that day. That way, with my phone in my hand, I remind myself I will be able to text or call my husband from the hiding place, if I'm fortunate enough to find one, to let him know what's happening. Something tells me my parents didn't have these concerns when they were dropping me off at preschool, but clearly this is another America. And finally, as a professor, I head into my own classroom every day wondering how today's lesson on hate crimes will intersect with the latest gun violence tragedy, praying that our campus will remain shooter-free for one more day. So I share that just as a way of having you all, it's trying to give voice to many of the concerns that we have as mothers, as people who work in the public sphere, that this issue of gun violence, it isn't far from my thoughts every day. And it's the thing that commits me to the work, but it frames every interaction. I was telling my students just the other day, in the year 2013, there were 28 school shootings on K through 12 campuses as well as college campuses. I did a conversation last week. In the month of January during 2014, we've already had 14 school shootings. And that's a month where school was shortened because of the holidays and King holidays and other holidays. And also, we were in the middle of a polar vortex in many locations. And my brother-in-law, who is a principal in New York, he said, we having a school shooting every other day and we're in the middle of the polar vortex? He said, what's gonna happen when it warms up?
Okay.
You know, we are on pace to absolutely surpass the number of school shootings that we've had in the first 2 months of 2014. So I think that, again, being able to bring forward the issue that this is not an isolated incident. These incidents are happening in all of our public spheres, schools, places of worship, malls, entertainment venues, movie theaters. So again, we try to come at this work from the point of view of figuring out how is this a common terror? Not urban, not suburban, not rural. How are we all terrorized by this? And how are we going to work together to help all of us live in this country?
Well, it's a real series of questions. And I think that that's why I was encouraged with Humanizing Justice to think about it as making it, number one, a human issue, not a black issue, not a Latino issue, not a white issue, but a common human issue. I mean, I travel all over the world, and there's violence there, and it's, you know, in Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants. I have a picture that was in one of in the photo competition I did. There is the Belfast Wall, but it was taken. The picture was taken from a monastery where Catholics and Protestants used to meet in secret against their, you know, communities to try and solve this problem. But I don't think we can meet in secret anymore. I think that, like what you did in Champion when you first got this coordinator's position or role, is that you organized. And so Humanizing Justice for me is a kind of organization. But there are still people that don't realize the statistics that you just rattled off.
Right.
The average Joe citizen doesn't know that until it happens in their community or it affects them. So how are we going to develop these champions like you, like your brother-in-law, those on the front line? I mean, while your characters entangled are fictional, in reality, they are not. They are composites of real human beings. So how are we going to help develop these champions, starting with those younger than Julian?
Right. You know, something to say. In preparing for this conversation, I wanted to be in Houston as best I could. So I took some time to do a little bit of research on Houston, and I just want to make sure that I understand where I am. Houston is 43% Latino, as I understand it, about 20 or so percent African American, 20% white, Anglo. Is that roughly the breakdown?
Roughly,
yes.
Okay, about 6% Asian. That's what the statistics say.
Yeah.
Also, you know, I feel like
You must have gone to Kleinberger's site, but yeah, you're right. You're pretty much on the money.
Well, and I also wanted to understand how gun violence has been playing itself out in Houston. And what was curious to me is I was able to Slate magazine, this kind of online publication, does they were tracking gun violence across the nation over the last year. And they have Houston as part of the data sample, and they found that there had been approximately 240 gun violence related shootings in Houston as of last year. To put it in comparison, there were approximately 490 in Chicago. So Houston is not a place that's without, you know, this issue being it's quite relevant to Houston. I also did a little bit of work and heard about the Chad Holly, I believe that's his name, Holly incident, this issue of police brutality that has been happening within Houston. Also the Robert Tolan case
Yep.
where this young man was shot in a driveway and his mother was detained during that particular skirmish.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I was really struck by, though, most recently is the Mariah Bolden party. This is a party that had, and please forgive me if anyone, if these are loved ones of anyone who's present. I'm raising these as issues just to lift up some local concerns. But this issue of Mariah Bolden having a house party, and an innocent, seemingly young woman, she decides she wants to celebrate her 18th birthday, decides she wants to have a party, puts it out on social media. Individuals come to the party, frustrated they can't get in, and then begin to shoot. And with the media reports that I read indicate 2 killed and 10 wounded.
Wow.
This is what the end of this December 2013, as I recall.
Yeah.
And so, again, just trying to give myself an opportunity to spend a little time in Houston and understand what's happening on the ground. It seems to me that Houston, like so many cities, is grappling with the issue of gun violence that's being inflicted on minority communities, and then gun violence happening within minority communities.
Right.
And I mentioned the Bolden case because there's a part of Tangled that deals with the house party. And just as a reference, if you go to page 39, you can do it later. It is an account of a house party in Chicago that goes horribly. Well, actually, it happens while students are away at college. And it gives you a sense of how these shootings affect not only the individuals who are shot, but family members, loved ones, people on the block, people in the community. And this is a long way of answering your question, Perry, but my question is, how did the community deal with that situation? We have a young woman innocently having a house party. The party ends up resulting in 2 dead, 10 wounded. I'm curious to know how Houston made sense of that, because I really believe that this is a space, it's an important space for the community to latch on to. This is a place where Houston has a really important opportunity to bring its young people out of the grief and confusion of these kind of situations and to have them talk about this issue. Why are our young people deciding that shooting up a family home is the way that we resolve conflict when we can't get in a private party? And this is a space where Houston, this community, it's an important space for us to come out of the closet, come out of the shadows, and have a real serious intergenerational conversation about what's happening with our children, what our children are doing to us. I mean, this is a situation where young men have brought this violence into our homes, innocent individuals. And so again, like you were talking about this example of the monasteries, the churches, the synagogues, the mosques in Houston. This is an opportunity for Houston's got to come together and figure out what the young people are doing. It's got to be and hear the young folks' voices. And to really, one of the things that we also have to do as parents and as educators and folks who are in the community leading on this issue, we got to begin to hold our young people accountable.
Absolutely.
We got to help them understand that they do not have a right to kill us in our homes in this way. So that's just, I know I talked a whole lot about local things that you all are living with every day, but I'm just wondering about whether or not that's a space where we can begin to have some real serious conversation about inter-community violence.
Dr. Anderson Cobb, my name is Robin Collins Eldridge, and you touched on something, and this situation that you're speaking of, it brought something to mind. You know, Texas is very much a red state.
Absolutely.
And so I like to call us mind benders. Because one of the things that I noticed when this incident happened is that no one really focused on the things that you were just saying about our children coming in with guns and thinking this is the solution. Now this happens all around Houston and a lot of Texas in general. Yeah. But this is where the mind bending comes in, because we're a red state. The politicians, the law enforcement, and everyone took this as an opportunity to say, here we go. Here's our opportunity to twist the minds of everyone and say that this was social media, this was a black people situation, and look at how they handled it. Not about the guns, because of course you know that we have the right to bear arms here. We can take our guns with us everywhere. They took the focus off of that and put it into a situation of, it was the black children, it was social media, and they didn't raise those children right.
Blame game.
Exactly, it was a blame game, but it was mind-bending to take the focus away from it being about the guns and gun control, but more about the social group that it involved. And so that's one of the things that I struggle with as we talk about this, is not being a part of that mind-bending game. Let's not get caught up. They can bend and put that focus where they want to, but we as a black community need to come forth and say, hold on, what part do we play in this, and where can we make the change? We don't hold our politicians and the law enforcement accountable as well as we should. We fight the battle in the moment, and then we kind of disperse and walk away from it. So you're right on target.
I mean, there are organizations here, the Fifth Ward Enrichment Center, and of course, Omawale Luthuli, every year they do a Stop the Violence conference that they've done for 22 years, of which I've been a part of. The problem is that they're poorly funded, they're always struggling, even getting the word out. There are events that are going on that are in competition, but at the same time, I'm not going to give up. I think this is only the second Humanizing Justice event that I've done, but I think that it is going to be a key focus to get different communities to come together to have these conversations. And then we have to think outside of the box in doing so, which is what we haven't done. I did that photo competition. This segues into the fact that you've done this Guns and Play playwright competition. What, you got 240 submissions? How many from out of the country?
I got over 250 plays from 32 states, red and blue and purple, in 5 different countries. I had no idea. When I put out a call for plays, because of my work as a playwright, I just felt like I wanted to know what other artists are thinking about all this gun violence. So I put out a call, used social media, and began to get plays streaming into my mailbox. My husband was like, "What you gonna do with all these plays?" But they were coming from everywhere: Australia, New Zealand, England, Canada. Like I said, 32 states, and it has been. And Perry was wonderful enough to serve as one of my judges. Is just begin to read and to understand that the arts community absolutely is concerned. They're engaged. They're creating work to address these issues. And so our plan is to be staging some of these works in the fall and in the spring on the campus where I work. However, here, when I want to go back to this issue that you just raised, I understand the difficulty of organizing, but I also know that just like we use social media to advertise, the word got out about the party, right? We make use of social media for the things that we value. And I think that one of the things I thought about, because I never come to conversations like this without thinking about some solutions to offer,
right.
But our civic or our faith-based organizations, I think it's really time for us to hold the door open on this issue. And I think that we have got to plant a flag here and say, we are going to become a church. We're going to become, first of all, a sanctuary against violence. And then we're going to stay on this issue until we get some real traction and results, which means this month, we're going to talk about violence in our grammar schools, 1st through 8th grade. Next month, we're going to talk about women and gun violence. The next month, we're gonna talk about gun violence and the impacts on our senior citizens. The month after that, we're gonna talk about the international dimensions. I think that what has happened for me in my own life is that by continuing to do this work, I continue to see how it cuts across a lot of different issues. It's an economic issue. It's a mental health issue. It's a women's issue. It's a marriage issue. It's a parenting issue. It's an issue of interstate commerce. It's an issue in terms of our national policy. It's a public health issue. It is. There are so many different ways that you can slice it. I think that if organizations in Houston were to make a commitment to say, for the next 12 months, we're going to look at all the ways that this violence impacts our lives. Your organization could do it. One of the individuals' faith organizations could do it. I think it's about what I've realized in my own life is that it's about keeping the focus on the issue and continuing to slice it, continuing to show that this is this issue of violence, and frankly, this is not about taking guns away from folks who are using them for hunting, who are using them for recreation. However, we have an addiction to guns.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
We have addiction, and not just addiction to guns, but addiction to gun violence. And I think we gotta be able, one of those other things, we gotta deal with gun violence and masculinity. We just spent a whole year on this subject of gun violence and masculinity, whether it's Latino masculinity, African American masculinity, Anglo masculinity, Asian. If we just look at the issue of masculinity and the way that armed masculinity is affecting our culture, your organization would have ongoing programming for some time to come. So I would suggest keeping the issue in the forefront, and I could provide some additional information and resources for that.
And collaboration.
Thinking about a way to set a calendar so that we can continue to shed light on these issues, bringing our youth in, because the other thing is about, again, dealing with youth and masculinity, but also dealing with young women. What's my daughter's name? Mariah, who had this party. Mariah we got to tend to Mariah. Mm-hmm. Because Mariah had a party that was setting out to celebrate her crossing this threshold into her 18th year of life. And the very party that she hosted now becomes a killing field. Mm-hmm. So we got to look at how our young women are being impacted by gun culture. We got to look at how our young women are being impacted by the men in their lives, whether they're fathers, uncles, brothers, and cousins, who are using gun violence to survive in the streets of Houston, whether or not they are victims of it, because we know women are being shot and affected as well. But we also got to deal with our mental health and our emotional health as it intersects with this issue. So I think that again, her family is going to process this the way we need to. But I think that if we can hold up the families, hold up the incidents as a way of looking, that one shooting gives us so much to work with in terms of how our families, how our households, how our communities are blown apart by this. I'll say one other thing. I'm a historian by training, and the other thing that we can do, since we are finishing up Black History Month, is to be mindful of the fact that, number one, other people don't get to set our agenda on this issue, but number two, we as African people in America have had a long and troubled relationship with guns. Since we began our march from the African interior to the coast of West Africa, that was an armed struggle. Europeans brought guns to the African coast. African middlemen trafficked those guns into the African interior and brought Africans to the coast to be trafficked into the slave trade. And one of the cases that I make to my students quite often is that what we are experiencing now is another example of that trade. Guns that we don't make are being dropped into our communities. We serve as middlemen to bring them into the communities with drugs and other poisons, and our people are being trafficked out, either in body bags, to jail, or through the mental health trauma that's inflicted. So again, another example of the way that we gotta make real connections between our history with gun violence as enslaved people and how our communities continue to be enslaved because we live with the threat of gun violence within us every day. So, like what I'm saying is that I hear you, Lord knows I understand profoundly what it means to struggle around resources, to struggle around funding, to struggle around issues of getting the word out. However, I really do think that if we can create a calendar where we stay focused on this issue over time and let people understand this is an issue that we are struggling with seriously. It's bigger than a sound bite. It's going to take more than one program. And you don't get to determine how our community figures out how to struggle, heal, and get rid of this epidemic. You know, and I think that again, as I love that what my sister talks about in terms of mind benders. We know when we looked at a situation nationally where a young African American male is gunned down at a gas station, but instead of calling it one more black male gunned down at a gas station, it's called the loud music case. The case wasn't about loud music, it was about this young man's life. He has a name, and he has a family. He had a future. So again, we know that our minds are constantly being bent. We know that in this society, we're constantly getting encouraged to take our mind off what the real issue is. So I just, I really want to partner with you to hold firm on this issue and to really support you in what you want to do in terms of keeping it on our plates long enough for us to deal with this seriously.
Well, and I think that this is a great beginning. I mean, the idea that I worked with Reverend Angela Shannon, she was my pastor when she was here, that these connections are getting stronger and really vibrant in our need to solve this problem and to re-bend the story towards the truth and towards what we will do for the young people who we are responsible for. And if we can stop drunk drivers from driving the streets because a bunch of mothers got mad, people need to understand there are a bunch of mad mothers out here who, my daughter has a school, can't keep the front door open. Why? Because there are crazy people out there. But it's not just about the mentally ill. It's about the epidemic that you talk about, that we are addicted to violence. It's so prevalent that even somebody who is considers himself a peacemaker will use euphemisms about killing somebody or wringing their neck, or that we have to really change that, and it's going to take a lot of work. But I love your idea about a calendar, and making the calendar one that includes these other groups that are doing things, because this kind of conversation needs to be had on a regular basis, and we've got to figure out other ways to get it up and out there so that people don't miss it. A lot of times when things are happening, we miss it because we've got other things to do. But, this is being taped. We're going to get it up right away and let people know that humanizing justice is a creative measure. It's using art in all of its forms to bring attention to the tragedies that happen in our society, but also the hope. And that's what it is. I mean, us coming together for this conversation is about hope. And hope does not disappoint. It's saying, that you could be with your 2-year-old this morning. You work every day, all week, and you could be doing something differently too, but you shared with us. And what I am so honored about is that you didn't come unprepared. And this is what I want to say to the young people here. Get prepared. Don't just go to something to listen to what they have to say. Go knowing a little bit about them, excuse me, before you get there. And those are the kinds of things of critical thinking that we need to be doing. Sorry. I want to open it up to any questions for Dr. Anderson Cobb. Daniel.
I have a question, Dr. Anderson Cobb. I'm affectionately known as Daniel L., but my name is Danny Andrew Asbury L. I got a long name, so that's why we just say Daniel L. I'm affiliated with the Moorish Science Temple of America. You're in Illinois, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure you're familiar with them to some extent.
Now, repeat the organization again.
The Moorish Science Temple of America. Okay, so
when you said the L at the end, I said, "Oh, okay."
And but basically, in my perspective, the Black and Latino communities are the same people. To me, I was raised in a house where I have a godmother that's from Puerto Rico. My mom is from Louisiana. My dad's Egyptian. But I was born here in Houston, and looking at all the diversity, and how all of the families sort of were, both sides of my family were very different. There was still no inclination of gun violence, right?
Is that sarcasm at its best?
Yeah, at its best, right? But basically, I'm just coming to this point. I noticed a change in the frequency of gun violence. I'm an 80s baby. I was born in 1982. And, things started to change around the mid-90s. And that's when they started to take art out of schools. That's when they started to strip us from a lot of our financing, because from the 70s and early 80s, we worked hard at obtaining financing, banks and all of that. We had a lot of that around, but within the mid 90s, a lot of that started to go away. So now we have all this idle time. We have no financing. So now all we can do is just sit down and think and let our minds be so-called the devil's workshop. I'm thinking the problem is these children don't have enough to do, and I think that their value systems are skewed because they're being marketed to heavily. So just like I love the fact that Ms. PK opened up the IC design schools on the weekends, because she teaches children how to be smarter than the marketers. But a lot of these parents out there, they don't have the knowledge to teach their children how to be smarter than the marketers. Now you have Facebook, right? You have all these fights and this aggression and this energy being spewed through social media. And that's being, Facebook can say, we're going to be responsible and we're not going to let you post fight videos. But they're not, because it's big business. So because it's big business, they let it go on, but these children are absorbing this energy and they think that it is okay. You get BET, you have women fighting women like men. And then you have men fighting men and going to guns, and like how you said about the masculinity, I totally get that. There's not enough feminine energy to go around, and we really need that. But at the same time, we need the young men to understand who they are at a very, 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 very early age, and they're not getting that. Our education systems, we're depending on these public schools, but we're not raising schools ourselves.
Building schools.
Right. So, they're building schools, but these schools are getting us ready for prison or a much worse fate. So I know I just said a lot, but I'm just saying that I just noticed a decline in a lot of various areas in the world of Blacks and Latinos. And I just think that, Blacks and Latinos need to know about law at an early age. B, Blacks and Latinos need to be heavily engrossed in their own arts. C, Blacks and Latinos need to have their own schools that people like them and who is watching out for them can be great examples, great citizens, great leaders, for our upcoming generations.
Ashe, ashe.
And then lastly, we need to increase our involvement in the arts, because it's something about having a creative mind that you'll be able to think outside of the box. No matter what your situation is, you'll be able to think, oh man, if red plus blue equals purple, then this situation I'm in may not equal the best for me. Or if I do this particular action, this may happen to me. I mean, artists are known as thinkers. They think all the time. They think about how things go together. Engineers, when you think about an engineer, you're like, oh, he thinks. An artist, oh, he might be a little crazy, but he sure does think. People who are invited into these, people who are involved in the arts, they are known as those people who are setting the social standard. But there's not enough of us setting the social standard. We're just following. So that's my take. Just wanted to add that. I'm behind the camera.
I don't know if there was a question. I don't think there's so much I'm in agreement with. I mean, I absolutely agree that we have to disrupt the beef culture, this culture of constantly, chronically being at each other's throats for no reason. And that's what I really call for. I think it's really vital that what I was going to say about the Bolden shooting is that not only do we need to care for the family, I'm saying it right, not only do we need to care for the family, and what's interesting is that next month is Women's History Month. This will be a great opportunity, PK, hint, wink, to have a conversation about the impact of violence on women and families. But the truth of it is that we have to care for the shooters like we care for the victims. One of my concerns is that too often individuals who are involved in crimes involving gun violence, they get trafficked straight into the prison system. And again, as people of faith, as people of conscience, we don't often enough tend to them. We need to be reaching out to individuals who are involved in violent crimes and their network.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we got to have conversations about why. Baby, why did you think that, how did you get to a place where because you couldn't get into a little house party, you decide you're going to take 2 lives, wound 10 others, and ruin your own life? We got to be willing to have conversations. And I mean bringing young men and women from across communities. It's a difficult thing, but I think faith organizations, art organizations, and cultural organizations are in the best place to do it.
And I think this is a call to action. That what you just said is really right now the call to action, where we can really encourage our churches and our leadership to give us the space to do this. I mean, I was just talking with Robin early today about how we could do these conversations, and the ideals flow, but what's been really great about what's been happening these last 6 months, being in Project Row Houses, is we're doing it. We're doing it. And in doing it, we're finally beginning to get some of the attention. But we are doing it even when there's no money, we come into a mess and have to clean up. The bottom line is that we are bringing people together to do that. And I just want to say, I thank you so much. I mean, there's so much more I would really like to say, so I think we need a second conversation with Dr. Anderson Cobb, don't you?
Woo!
Let me just pose this to you really quickly. Like I said, this play, Tangle, that I wrote, it engages so many of the issues that we talked about today and many that we haven't. And I would propose, the way that I've used this play, you get some stools, You can do it. It doesn't require a lot of overhead. It requires readers and stools. You read the play, you have a discussion afterwards, some food refreshments of your choosing, and we can use the play as a fundraiser. We know that our arts organizations need funding. So we can move the product, move the message, and use it as a fundraiser to support the very program that you're doing now.
Absolutely.
So we can talk more about that, as we go. But I just want to be able to connect the conversation with a project that exists, and
Right.
it can be a way for us to keep the conversation going. It certainly is a book about women's issues as Women's History Month approaches. But also keep the conversation before us, because I think, again, that's our challenge. The challenge is, we know that the media was on to the next story as soon as they wrapped up their power cord on the camera.
Right.
But we gotta keep our eye on this because it's us. It's our story. These are our children. These are our communities. I wrote this play in 2009. I never imagined, when I got a PhD in African history, I never imagined that my life would take this course and I would be in a situation where I would be doing anti-gun violence prevention work for the last 5 years. But the Lord orders my steps.
That's
So
right.
I'm talking about 5 years of trying to keep the light burning on this issue. And more people are inviting me to speak, inviting me to do different things. And I think, again, if we keep the message before us and remain prayerful and vigilant, we can do with it.
Well, I want to show everybody, this is Tangled. We're going to figure out for you to get one, but I'm going to work with Dr. Anderson Cobb about getting some more copies here and about doing this here. I got to about page 30, so I hadn't gotten to page 39. But the very first page, I knew I was going to have to read it right away. I mean, the very first page. Yeah, because, I don't even want to tell you. It just starts off with that, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? Mm-hmm. So, like I said, there's so much to say. You can organize questions, but it's only when you start getting into the conversation that you realize all the places that you can really go. And again, I just want to thank you. Robert, did you?
I'm going to step up and say that I'm going to help to get that play done here.
Okay, beautiful. Okay.
I'll hook you two up.
I got cousins in Houston, so I need to come check on my baby.
All right. Okay.
That's a deal. That's a deal. And
thank you all so much for your attention, for your questions, for your comments. You all have been so wonderful. I'm looking forward to getting to Houston now, just to hug y'all next.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we want to hug you.
We love you, Doc.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you so much again. This was a lot of fun and just,
Well, this gives us some opportunities to really develop this method of getting the word out. This method, so that we can go about making this world, ending this epidemic. Mm-hmm. And now we know what it is, and we'll call it what it is.
Yeah.
Daniel has been our videographer today. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
To everyone who came and got here. I had a lot of RSVPs, but that's life. But the people who needed to be here were here, and I'm just grateful for that. And so I'm going to give away one of the books. I know they all want it now. And we love you. I love you. Thank you so much.
And I'll get some more to you as well. So
Okay.
For your ITD library. So.
Okay. All right.
Woo.
You got it.
Be in touch, Terry. We'll follow up.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Houston.